two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Teresa Ault. We present excerpts from the Tompkins County Workers Center's Living Wage Town Hall held June 22, 2025. Michael Demo spoke first.
It's fitting that we can hold this event here, of all places, because this building was built by the Works Progress Administration during the Great Depression. It was dedicated in a ceremony attended by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt in 1938. That's actually the same year that minimum wage was first introduced in the United States. Roosevelt had been trying to pass a wage since he took office in 1933, and he finally got it in 1938 at 25 cents. I want to talk a little about what happened to put our campaign in context. The federal minimum has famously been stuck at $7.25 for almost 20 years. But back when boomers were kids, it went up rapidly. By the 1950s, the wage had tripled to 75 cents. And in 1956, Republican President Eisenhower championed its increase to a full dollar. At that point, quite a few workers were economically kind of much better off than I am today. One way to generalize about the minimum wage across time is to compare the wage historically to the wage today by adjusting the figure for inflation using a consumer price index. That analysis reveals that the federal minimum wage peaked in the 1960s and has been going down ever since. It's down more than 30% from that peak. But another approach to comparing can be even more illuminating, I think, just looking at specific historical prices and wages. In 1956, when the federal minimum wage was $1, you could get a McDonald's hamburger, fries, and a milkshake for 47 cents. Today, it takes me about an hour of work, about twice as long to buy the equivalent, and I make more than much more than the New York State minimum wage, which is itself twice the federal minimum wage. In 1956, the nationwide median rent for apartments of all sizes was about $60, or in terms of gross pay, roughly 7 days of work at the $1 minimum wage. Current nationwide median rent for a one-bedroom is $1,589, which would take more than 2.5 40-hour weeks to match the gross pay alone at our current New York State minimum wage of $1,550, 3 times as long as it took in 1956. So long you have very little pay left over for other expenses that month. It'd be even worse, of course, on the federal minimum wage. You'd need more than a month to pay for 1 month's rent in the median one bedroom. Or let's compare 1975. By then the wage was $2, or $320 a month gross for someone working full time. Here are some expenses you might have faced. Nationwide median rent was just north of $150. And again, that's median for all apartment sizes. A decent used car was about $1,000, and a week's groceries for one person was less than $20. Looking at figures like those, I think you can start to see how the world of Roseanne, the sitcom, was possible, or the world of Springfield in The Simpsons. A world where working class people, at least those with privilege, could afford a family and a house, or at least good housing, and generally a standard of living that was low and limited, but kind of workable. That's almost in line with the vision Roosevelt had for the federal minimum wage. Speaking of the NIRA in 1933, he said, "No business which depends for its existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. And by living wages, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean the wages of decent living." It may surprise some of you to learn today that this vision is not at all realized here in Tompkins County. But don't take my word for it. We have someone here who has taken a very hard look at hyperlocal data and can tell us all about the expenses that workers like myself face and the minimum wage that they really need to live in this area. That's Ian Freer. I'll let him take it away.
So I'm involved in calculating our local living wage number, and it's currently $24.82 an hour. So where does that number come from is a question that is often asked. And thankfully, at this event, there is a report on the table that lays out how we calculate it. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history and the idea of it. So the history is here. One of the unique things about our area is we've had a living wage calculation that employers have used to think about what the wage floor should be, that unions have used in collective bargaining. So this started in the 1990s with Alternatives Federal Credit Union calculating it with the support of some of our undergrads at the ILR school. A few years after that, MIT developed a living wage calculator that could be used to calculate local living wage numbers for any county in the country, which had a pretty similar methodology to ours. So I'm director of the ILR Ithaca CoLab, and we took over doing the calculation a couple of years back. So the idea is a local countywide wage number to think about the wage floor in terms of a cost of living calculation that is based on expenditure data. In the past, this number was calculated using whatever data was easily accessible or freely accessible. It was very comprehensive, so it had most everything that people need to live. It even included savings, taxes, of course, housing, food. But some of the data sources were pegged expenditure levels as the same throughout the country, like the food number, which obviously there are differences in the country. Some of them were regional data, some of the same data sources that are used to calculate inflation. So what we have done is we have calculated a number based on actual data on expenditure for this county. It's a commercial data set that is used for businesses to think about planning their investments and understand differences between consumer markets in different counties. So it's very responsive to real differences between the cost of living and a lot of different items between our county and the neighboring counties. Our county is higher for pretty much everything. It's a basic needs budget, so we're not looking at average or median expenditure. We're adjusting it down, and we're using 80% annual median income, and we're adjusting these expenditure items down to that. What we end up with is a budget of $52,000 a year, which then we divide up by 2,080 hours that a full-time worker does in a year, and we end up with this number 2482. So many employers will say, well, we need to do that in order to retain people, and it's the right thing to do. Others will say, well, how in the world are we going to pay that? It goes up too fast. We have all these workers who are making below that, some of which are even in managerial positions. And so it's kind of a hotly contested issue on the management side. Among others, I often hear, well, how does anyone live on that little money, $52,000 a year? That's right. So it's an underestimate, really. It lags. It's based on last year's data. It's lower than other living wage calculations that you could use. It's lower than the housing wage, for example. It's lower than the MIT living wage for a single person with no kids. Oh, that's something I forgot to mention. It's for a single person, no kids. It does not include childcare. If it included childcare, it would be much higher. This seems high to some people. It seems low to, I think, most people. And if you want to know more about the details of the data and how we do it, let me just refer you again to our report.
So Ian's living wage estimate of 2482 means that nearly 48% of workers in the county earn less than living wage. That's 23,000 workers. As I understand, that may be quite a low estimate given the costs associated with dependence and child care, as Steve was just saying. And if you're wondering where the 30% poverty in Ithaca comes from, I think we figured that out. Now, I think there's an expectation that I, as a worker here, will help to put a human face onto these abstract numbers. What is it like to earn less than a living wage? Obviously, I'm not dead. What is it like though? Well, here's an example. I caught a friend of mine struggling to stop crying so she could clock in one morning. Her car exhaust had broken on the way to work. The modest plans that she had for herself and her children, a trip to an amusement park the next month, new school clothes for the fall, were suddenly off the table. Just getting the repairs and making rent would be a grave concern. She was already unable to make ends meet. Those things were already like wild splurges budget-wise. I can't imagine what was going through her head at that point. How would she possibly tell her kids they weren't going to the amusement park or getting those clothes? Stress like that is hopefully few of us can relate to, and she had it first thing in the morning then. I remember she dried her eyes and put on a retail smile and she clocked in. There's so many stories like that. Really, these wages are cruelty, really horrible cruelty, perpetrated against hard-working people. I know that many in this community don't particularly care. So before I hand it over to Pete to talk about the legislative campaign, I'd like to add one more point, some perspective on how wasteful all of this is, an appeal to the self-interest of employers. We have a 400-year history of chattel slavery in this country. This system in the antebellum South was profitable for some slaveholders, but arguably extremely inefficient. Plantation owners surely thought they had it made. Labor with no payroll costs whatsoever. But in that arrangement, what they had really accomplished was to create a group of workers who did not meaningfully contribute to economic demand, who radically suppressed their own productivity as much as possible, and who were denied the ability to make substantial contributions to the economy of their own, such as through innovation, through opening a business, or even just through forming a household and amassing savings and investments. And to all those, and after all those missed opportunities, the cost of keeping everyone in line, through expensive management, often mandatory slave patrols. And lastly, and I think most importantly, the cost of the harm. I mean, the tremendous, unfathomable harm done to the slaves, which itself has had negative economic consequences both during the heyday of slavery and down to this day. Plantation owners chose slavery for profit, but arguably shot themselves in the foot with this inefficiency. This is quite a grand claim, but I think there are many who would agree that it doesn't seem like a coincidence that wealthy Northerners were generally wealthier and that the South was then and is now severely economically disadvantaged. That is, I believe, partly a result of the inefficiency of that economic arrangement they set up. And I think it's worth asking, are advocates of low wages making a similar mistake? The system we have here now of unlivably low wages is very different from antebellum slavery, but some of its disadvantages are similar. Employers might think they've got it made, low payroll costs, more money in the bank. But what they've really accomplished is to create a group of workers who do not meaningfully contribute to economic demand, who often can't afford to live and spend money in Ithaca at all, who often suppress their own productivity as much as possible, and who are denied the ability to make substantial contributions to the economy of their own, such as through innovation, through opening a business, or even just through forming a household and amassing savings and investments. Workers who now must be kept in line at considerable cost, to say nothing of the immense harm done to these workers and their families, and the very real and lasting economic consequences of that harm. To put it another way, we collectively are wasting my friend's time on her car exhaust system drama, on stress and tears for her children, impossible, exhausting daily efforts to make it all work, ruining her health with stress, when she is a great and capable person whose abilities we should seek to cultivate and unleash in this economy. That's a lot of inefficiency, just one example. It's really worth wondering to what extent waste like this offsets even the advantages to employers themselves of paying such low wages. And I would think quite substantially. I think the example of sunnier days some of our parents enjoy, and examples of economies abroad with less income inequality, like the Nordic nations, show how much better things can go. Or you can look at the example of New York City. They saw a dramatic reduction in child poverty and a 6% annual boost in restaurant sales when their minimum wage was increased above the New York State minimum, suggesting, in my opinion, a reduction in those inefficiencies. We're not just asking for higher wages, we're asking for a less wasteful economy. one which we can all enjoy greater and more real prosperity. The path to that runs through a living wage. Hundreds of municipalities across the country have used their local legislative bodies to raise the minimum wage already. That's what we want to do, and I'll hand it over to Pete, who can bring you up to speed on our campaign to get that done.
Pete Myers is coordinator of the Workers Center.
Just to give you a little bit of background about the Worker Center, if don't have much awareness of what we do, we started as an organization. Probably in the middle of 2002, we were not a formal organization, but we were, myself and a guy named Carl Foyer, who's a longtime labor organizer locally. Ithaca paraprofessionals within the ICSD came to us, and they were basically making the minimum wage. And the joint work of the union and the Worker Center really raised the fever pitch on that issue. And we had, I remember a big rally about, like a year and a half into the campaign that was wended all the way through the downtown Ithaca area and culminated at Southside Community Center. Like 750 people came to that rally. It really brought a lot of energy. And the school board felt really pressured, thankfully, and were able to resolve that issue where they got a living wage. Very, 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 very unfortunately, the school district has not kept pace with that, so the Ithaca paraprofessionals start out now way below the new living wage. And so there's another pressure campaign to do there. We were one of the leaders early on in upstate New York in terms of working to fight for statewide increases, which, like back in 2004, the minimum wage was $5.50 an hour, so that was a challenge. We first began, bizarrely, not many people know this, some will. We actually started this campaign for a local minimum wage at the city and county level 10 years ago. We also lobbied basically all the towns and the cities to support this legislation back in 2015, and I'm actually saying this because we need to do it again. The city of Ithaca voted unanimously in favor of an increase of the minimum wage at the county level. The town of Caroline, conservative town, unanimously endorsed this campaign. Town of Dryden, town of Ithaca, town of Enfield, representing 71% of the population of Tompkins County. So there's a lot of support out there for this, and there was one person in all those bodies that voted against this, one person. One of the really important, the last thing I'm going to say is one of the most important things is the coalition that we're building. We actually had a coalition of 40 organizations back in 2015. We've got 12 now, we just have to rebuild it again. It's obviously Ithaca DSA, United Auto Workers Local 2300, Tompkins County Immigrant Rights Coalition, Tompkins County Working Families Party, Mutual Aid Tompkins, Ithaca Tenants Union, Feeding New York State, which is a statewide organization that supports the food banks, the Rochester Regional Joint Board Workers United, which is probably one of the most rocking unions in the country, and think Gimme Coffee, think Ithaca Health Alliance, think Science Center, think something I'm forgetting locally. And lastly, we're really working on the living wage employers because we got a lot of support for the last campaign. We, at this point, have 2 construction companies, Landmarks Building Company, which is on the border here in Trumansburg, and Brotherton Construction.
Hi everyone, my name is Veronica Kuller. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am a resident of Ithaca and representative of District 2 on the Tompkins County Legislature. And I've been there for the past 3.5 years. And I am here because he asked me to be, and it's good to do things that he asks. But also because the issue of the problem of people not making a living wage in their jobs is something that is really important to me to solve, as other people talked about. Well, as Pete said, there's been a campaign to try to make, to raise, in various forms, to try to raise the local minimum wage for a long time. At the county legislature, we had a discussion about this last year that landed on a commitment to allocate $50,000 to do a study on what would be the impacts of raising the minimum wage in Tompkins County, but not in surrounding counties. Typically, you may know there's almost all of New York State has the same minimum wage. New York City has something higher. I think there might be a couple other like downstate exceptions, but typically whatever the minimum wage in Tompkins, so it is in Schuyler County, Cleveland County, Cuyahoga County, whatever. We believe that it makes sense to have more local control over what the minimum wage is, especially because what a living wage is, what we're looking to compare to, is different in different areas. Certainly last year's report, maybe this year's report, a mapping of what different living wages are in nearby counties. And spoiler, they're all higher than minimum wage, but Tompkins is especially higher. The legislature had, people were interested, but of course all the various questions come up of like, what if it harms this, that, and the other? And so, but we were on board to have people do a study to answer those questions. And unless something very surprising comes out of that study, the next step that I hope to be there for is to introduce local legislation to try to raise our minimum wage. The request for proposals for the study has been something we've been waiting for a while. It will be posted this week. I have been authorized to say publicly that the RFP will be out this week.
I'm Tiffany Kumar. I represent Ward 4 on the Ithaca Common Council, so that's most of College Town. I'm a political organizer and a recent graduate of the ILR school. Last cycle, I ran Josh Riley's Tompkins County field operation. So why I'm here, I grew up in Manhattan. I came from a single working class mom, and I came into this work because I understand what it's like to live with economic insecurity. And because of that's really shaped my belief that nobody working full time should be living paycheck to paycheck. The testimonials that we were hearing just a second ago, I think that to have to choose between rent and groceries while putting in 40, 50, 60 hours a week is a policy failure on our part. At this point, I truly believe that with the wage where it is and how far below it is a living wage, we're asking our most vulnerable workers to subsidize the economy with the poverty that they're living through. Workers that are disproportionately people of color. So to me, it just comes down to if you work here, you should be able to afford to live here. And I know that it's interesting that Ithaca was kind of the first leader on this with the campaign. I think that Ithaca likes to talk a lot about being a progressive city, but values, they don't mean anything if they're not backed by law. You can't pay your bills with a resolution. You can't feed your kids with symbolic words. So if we're really serious about being a city that respects labor, that respects worker dignity, that builds equity and supports working families, I think we need to pass a living wage ordinance as soon as possible.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Matos. I am also a city council member and deputy mayor, and I am a council representative for Ward 1, which is this ward, which is also amazing. I'm here for many of reasons, and like Tiffany said a little bit ago, growing up, I was that child within those systems that were not working. I was the child that Michael was referring to earlier, whose mom had a trip planned, and then last minute some bill came up and we could no longer go. And I am an organizer who loves to be a part of the community and take part in the fight to make our community a more equitable place. Also, with my hat as Deputy Director of the Southside Community Center, I work to empower our most marginalized communities and provide services to them. So this all aligns with the work that I do for the fight for our everyday people to build more equity and a more, and honestly generational wealth for the communities who have had that stripped away from them.
Hello everyone, my name is Rashad Youssef. I am a retired union carpenter who has devoted some of his time to promoting just cause legislation and working with the Tompkins County Workers Center. As has been mentioned already, not making ends meet is stressful, and we all know that stress makes for an unhappy life and not a healthy life. So, I'm all in with any sort of efforts to increase the minimum wage to a living wage. I want to encourage all of you, should you live outside of Tompkins, but even if you do, don't hesitate to contact your assembly people, your house reps, even if you think that it may not get anywhere or find purchase. to antagonize our representatives with what we need and what we want is what we need to be doing more of, and not just to let them get away with, not reaching out. So, in this case, this is where being antagonist is going to help us all.
Hello, my name is Emily Adams, and to answer the question, why am I here? Because people approached me and said, well, you're the chair of the Working Families Party, now you can come to this thing. And I said, who's not for raising the minimum wage to the living wage? Why is this a thing? Why don't we have to have a meeting about it? But okay, I'll come. And I have to say, coming in the door and seeing those green yard signs, there was one in my parents' garage when I moved back here from Europe 10 years ago. After my mother died, I came back to be with my dad. And there was one of those in the garage, one of the original countries. I don't think they even made the plastic bicycles over the EU. And it's shocking to me that we're still here fighting for this. And I can also share that as an American living overseas for 10 years, in a country where you have to speak 3 languages in Belgium to get a regular white-collar job. So I was working menial labor job, cleaning houses in Europe, married to my European husband. And we were making ends meet, and everything was fine. Healthcare was free. Transportation was basically free, and if you had kids, you could have sent them to university for, $1,000 a year. And then they come back to this country and see that we're still struggling to get minimum wage up to where it was back in 1940. It's ridiculous. So, yes, I'm here full of righteous indignation and just appalled at where we are, but proud to learn just now that Ithaca is one of 3 places that's challenging this abhorrent situation. And good luck, and it's fantastic, and all I can say is that WFP person, all of our candidates plus are supporting this, and how could they possibly not? And let's go get it. Let's go change this thing.
That was the Tompkins County Workers Center's Living Wage Town Hall. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Teresa Alt. Thanks for watching.